Welcome back, girls. I'm going to apologize in advance. Knowing myself, there's a good chance that by the end of this class, I'm going to go off on a little rant on something that really annoys me in modern modern Judaism, which is connected to what we're going to be discussing today. So if I get a little bit heated and passionate, uh, I'm apologizing in advance. Okay, so we finished previously, right, talking about the tefillah. And the king of Kuzari he says, it's very interesting, right, that there is no mention of Olam Haba in our tefillah, right? I see nothing to criticize here. He really likes the explanation that the Hacham gave about basically the journey that the tefillah is taking us through, right? From Yotzer Me'orot to the Shema to Ga'al Yisrael to the Shemona Yisrael, right? The structure of the tefillah and how we're asking for the communal needs of the nation. And by blessing the nation, we as individuals will benefit also from that blessing. But he says, I see nothing to criticize. It's beautiful, everything that you explained. On the contrary, everything is structured with great care and balance. There is only one point that could be raised. Your prayers say very little about the world to come, right? We barely discuss Olam Haba in the Tefillah. He says, okay, but you have already shown me that a person who prays for closest divine presence and for the ability to perceive it in this world, who reaches a level approaching that of prophecy during prayer, has in fact asked for something far greater than the world to come. Okay, so in our tefillah, like I explained previously, tefillah is the other side of the coin of nivu'ah. Nivu'ah is God speaking to us. Tefillah is us approaching God. It's really opening up that same channel, right? Everyone with their own preparation for this connection with God. So really what we're asking for in our tefillah is this connection, this lived connection to God in this world. And when you achieve that, right, what is the Olam Haba? That's living in that connection without the distractions of this world over here. So in fact, we're asking for something far greater than the world to come, right? Because what are we doing in our tefillah? We're asking to live this connection here in this world already. So nothing brings a person closer to God than this. Such a person does not lose the world to come, he gains it as well, right? Meaning we're just transitioning this lived connection from this bodily life into this the next world, which is the life without this body. If even while bound to the body and subject to its limitations and suffering, his soul can connect to the divine influence, then it stands to reason that once the soul is freed from the body, that connection will only become stronger and more complete. However, the other nations do obsess about this Olam Haba, right? Many are always talking about your salvation in the next world, or God forbid, to Gehenna, or you're going to be damned to hell in the next world if you don't say these phrases, right? Appointing Jesus as your savior or Muhammad as the messenger of God. And our tefillah doesn't mention anything about Olam Haba. So look how the Hacham responds. He says, I'm going to explain this with a parable. A man once came before a king. The king drew close, treated him as an intimate friend, and granted him permission to enter his presence whenever he wished, right? He became close to the king. He became friends. Who does this remind us of, right? Kasher yeddaber ish el ra'ehu, like Moshe Rabbeinu, freely talking to God. Their relationship became so close that the king would visit his home and dine at his table, right? Who wants to explain this part of the parable? It says, when we build the Mishkan, it's a place for God to reside among us, right? When we bring korbanot, right? It's as if, so to speak, God is dining at our table. Not only that, but he would send his highest ministers to him and honor him in ways he showed no one else, right? Such as sending malachim to speak to the Nevi'im, right? So this is the ultimate closeness to God, or in this parable, a person being close to the king. Whenever this man neglected something or acted improperly, the king distanced himself from him. All he asked was that the king restore their former closeness and continue visiting, not just continue sending his ministers to visit him. Right? So once this person, maybe he did something that was not to the king's liking. So what did the king do? He kind of just placed distance. I need some space from you at the moment. And this person who was formerly so close with the king, he's craving this closeness of the king, right? So what is he praying for? He's praying for this restored relationship with the king, right? That is exactly the model of our tefillah. Hashiva shofetenu kavarishona says, return us to our land, restore our judges as they once were, right? Rebuild the temple, this house where you can reside among us, this table where you can dine together with us, right? Bring Qurban Shelamim, where half of the Qurban is burnt to God and half of the Qurban is eaten by the person who brings the Qurban, right? So that's what our tefillah is focused. We had this relationship with God, right? We did something to upset him, and now he distanced himself from us. And now what we're doing is we are praying for this restored connection, this closeness back to God. The rest of the people in the kingdom, however, only sought the king's protection when they were preparing for a journey, fearing robbers, wild animals, or dangers on the road. Right? Some people, when do they pray to God? Only when they're in despair. Right? That's why tefillah is so commonly perceived as asking God for your needs. While in Jewish thought, tefillah isn't about asking God for your needs. It's about cultivating a relationship with God. So they trusted that the king would guard them during travel, even though they had never experienced any special closeness to him while living safely at home. Right? While they're in the city, the capital city where the king lives, they never tried to visit the king. They never tried to find pleasure in the king's eyes, but now that they're going on to a journey, they want the king to send a convoy to guard them so they don't get robbed. Maybe they want to have like a special passport. It says, I'm an American citizen. If anything happens to me, I know I can go to the American embassy and the United States government is going to work hard to release me, right? Having a good passport, having some sort of certification. I'm a citizen of this king. Each one boasted that the king cared for him more than anyone else, imagining that he honored the king more than all others, right? I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, God loves me more than anybody else. But the king's intimate friend paid little attention to his own departure and did not ask for guards to escort. When the time came, the others warned him, "You are going to perish on the road. You have no protection." He says, "How are you traveling without asking the king for some sort of convoy to escort you?" Says, "Who gave your companions the guards?" He asked them. Says, "The king," they answered. "We have been asking him for protection ever since we arrived in the city, but we never saw you asking for anything." Right? Our tefillah doesn't say, "Please grant us olam haba, save us from Gehenom." Right? What are we asking for? He says, "You fools. Is not the person who remained close to the king in his times of peace even more deserving of his help in time of danger? Even if he never asked aloud, would the king ignore someone in his hour of need after having welcomed him during times of prosperity?" Says our relationship to God isn't because we need something from him. Our relationship to God is because we crave this closeness to God. And God as well, he loves our closeness. So we have what's called bitachon. We have security, meaning this mental confidence that God is looking out for us also in our times of need, even if we don't specifically ask him for his help. We know that when we're in times of need, God is going to step in. He steps in to give us bounty and blessing in times of prosperity, right? When we don't need anything, he's giving us more than what we can ask for. We say, beracha ad bilidai, right? He gives us blessing ad bilidai to no end. And the Hachamim say, what does that mean, ad bilidai? Bili means without, but they say from the word yivlu, where your mouths get tired of saying die, enough. So God gives us prosperity until we say enough, enough, enough. Our mouths are tired of saying enough. So we have this confidence of God providing for us also in our darkest hours. And if you claim that the king protects you because you honor him, has any of you served him as faithfully as I have? How many mitzvot does Christianity have? Afuch, they annulled all the mitzvot. Have any of you worked as hard to fulfill his commands, avoid dishonor, and respect his laws? Everything I did was according to his instruction and command. For 2,000 years, even without a police force, we still obeyed his instructions. Everything we did was in compliance with God's instructions. Why? Because we love God, and so we follow his instructions. We have confidence that what God says to us is the best thing that can be. We have confidence that his wisdom and his laws are perfect laws, and so we follow them exactly as he instructed. You honor him according to your own imagination and personal ideas, right? Going back to following the precise instructions of God, or making up a way to serve God according to our own speculative ideas of what God may or may not want from us. And still he does not abandon you. See, God loves everybody. God tries to guide everybody on the correct path unless they are wicked and evil, right? Even though you Christians and Muslims or Buddhists or whatever speculate on how to serve God, and God is still there for you in your times of need, us who follow his instructions to the letter, right? We don't speculate. What he says is what we do, no more and no less, right? We can have confidence in this connection with God. And that is all we want. Why are we asking to restore the temple in the tefillah? Because there are so many mitzvot related to the temple, and without it, we can't perform this mitzvot. We love the mitzvot so much that we're asking for God for more opportunities to do the mitzvot. So how could he abandon me now simply because I trusted in his justice and didn't ask as you did? We know God, we have trust that God, he controls the world, he governs the world. If you're going from city to city within a strong kingdom, right, you don't need to be afraid of robbers because you know there's going to be justice, and that's going to deter robbers from attacking you. So I have confidence in the journey that I take. And so I don't need to go and seek some sort of certificate that says that I am friendly with the king. This parable applies to those who abandon the proper path and refuse to accept the teachings of the sages. All right, so he's giving sort of a critique. He's going to be talking a little bit further down about the Karaites who comply with the Torah. However, they reject the rabbinic tradition. It could be that he's also hinting here to Christianity, who also say that the rabbis made up an entire tradition, and the truth is that by rejecting the Masoret, they went as far as rejecting all the laws themselves of the Torah. Besides this, our prayers do contain many allusions to the world to come, and the teachings handed down from the prophets to the sages are filled with descriptions of paradise and Gehinnom, as we explained earlier, right? We don't obsess over Olam Haba, over Gan Eden and Gehinnom, right? The Tefillah does hint to it a few times. There are statements of the Hachamim and the Talmud that talk about it here and there, but that's not what Judaism is about. I have now described for you the conduct of a religious person in our own time. For this, you can imagine what life must have been like for those blessed times in the Holy Land among the people descended from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Right? So we're talking about asking for a passport in our journey. Right? What is this journey? It's this 2,000-year dark ages, the exile of the Jewish people. Right? What we're talking about is restore us to our former glory, to our former connection with you. Right? And even then, we're not focused on what happens after we die. We're focused on how we live. But now imagine, this is our situation when we are in exile. Imagine what it was like when we were living in our sovereign land right under King David. We were living with these pillars of our nation, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our forefathers, men and women distinguished by virtue, without nothing improper to pass their lips, right? They never said bad words to people. They never spoke lashon hara. Imagine living in a nation, in a country filled with these kind of people. A pious person living among us, among such people, would not have his soul polluted by corrupt speech, nor would impurity cling to his clothing or surroundings through uncleanliness, corpse, disease, right? No tum'ah. Everyone preserves the laws of tahara, which we don't today, because the entire society lived in holiness and purity. This was even more true in the land of the Shekhinah, right? Back in the times where we had the Shekhinah here, times of Shemuel, Hanavi, David HaMelech, Shlomo, where one encountered people devoted to holiness, priests, Levites, Nazirim, sages, the Hachamim, the prophets, the judges and officers, right? We saw earlier that Shaul, he was passing through a group of prophets. He was just walking on his own, arbitrarily, came across a bunch of prophets. He was so inspired by these people that he himself prophesied as well. This doesn't happen, right, when you're walking around in New York or walking around someplace in some far corner of the world. What are you afraid of over there? You look for protection from robbers. When you're living in a just society, one that encourages holiness, then you can walk and wander around and happen upon a group of sages, talk to them, get wisdom from them, happen upon a group of prophets, be inspired by them, and achieve prophecy yourself. One would witness crowds ascending joyfully during the 3 pilgrimage festivals, right, with voices of joy and praise, right, 3 times a year. In a few days, we have Shavuot, one of the 3 regalim, where everyone comes to Jerusalem. The temple, think of the Temple Mount filled with Levites playing harps and all sorts of instruments. Everyone dressed nicely for the Chag. Have a service of God over there, centralized on the temple. Hundreds and thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people coming together in worship. He would hear the song of God, only the song of God, and see only the work of God, meaning all the worship he sees is centralized to God. All the music he listens to is divine music. I love listening to my go-to music is the Andalusian orchestra, all piyutim. If you like, I don't know, Sephardi Chazanim or Ashkenazi Chazanim, you listen to their music, especially if you were a priest or Levite living among the service of God, like Samuel, who served in the house of God from childhood onwards, right? Shemuel Hanavi was brought up in the Mishkan. His teacher, his master was Eli, the high priest. Such a person did not need to chase after a livelihood because his entire life was devoted to the service of God. How exalted do you think such a life was? Right, so you're not always begging God for paranasah. You're living according to the Torah, and that brings you blessing. So this is the highest level, he admits, the king of Kuzari, a human being can reach, short of the angelic state itself. By the way, remember, in order to reach the highest level that a human being can reach, you need to be living in a society that's on the highest level a society can be. You can't reach the highest level of human perfection as an individual, only within this society. A way of life like this can lead a person towards prophecy, especially in the place where the divine presence dwells. A religion of this kind has no need for ascetic withdrawal or monastic isolation. Right? If we have a just society made up of just people and holy people, then why would you ever need to withdraw into the mountains and isolate yourself? The highest form of worship you can do is communal, because everybody is worshiping together and everybody gets inspired by each other. Now I ask you to explain the doctrine of the Karaites. It's not really the doctrine of the Karaites, because it's probably a bad translation, but he wants address the Karaites. From what I see, they appear even more zealous in their faith than the Rabbinites, or by rabbinic tradition. It says the Karaites, those who rejected rabbinic tradition, right? They were a very, very strong sect about 800 years ago, even going back 1,000 years ago. They were gaining traction in the times of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. A generation later, Maimonides. So Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi and a lot of the sages of his time actually wrote books addressing the Karaites specifically. When Maimonides, the Rambam, 2 generations later, arrived in Egypt, it was primarily Karaite. Karaites were a sect of Judaism that rejected the rabbinic tradition, and they followed biblical law like to the letter, literally. It says, Lo tiva'aru esh, right? B'yom Shabbat, you shouldn't light a fire on Shabbat. Their Shabbats were dark. They had no fire lit in their house. They didn't light a fire before Shabbat or light candles before Shabbat to have light during the Shabbat. They said, no, the Torah says you shouldn't have fire in your houses on Shabbat, so we're going to sit in darkness. And many such things. So on the one hand, they appear very, very strict in their observance, and they have a lot of what we'd call today humrot, a lot of stringencies that they live by. And so they seem very zealous in their faith. And their arguments seem more straightforward and more closely aligned with the plain meaning of the Torah. Because they reject any rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, so their interpretation, by the way, it's still an interpretation of the Torah, their interpretation of the Torah is very literal. So it seems to be more compliant to the text of the Torah to someone who is uneducated in the Torah. And we saw before that part of his criticism over there, he says all this is regarding those who reject the rabbinic tradition, right? So here he's going to go more deeply into the criticism of the Karaites, and we're going to see in what it's still relevant today, even though there are no more Karaites today, mostly thanks, by the way, to Maimonides. He, so to speak, converted many of them, intellectually went to war against them, and really wiped them out intellectually. So they're mostly, they mostly converted due to him to traditional rabbinic Judaism. So there's like almost, it's a very, very small sect, if at all, today, kind of like the Shomronim. So did we not already explain that speculation, personal reasoning, and imagined religious systems do not lead to closeness with God? right? The Karaites, they appear even more zealous in their faith. However, what brings you closer to God is following God's instructions, not bringing humrot on yourself, not accepting extra stringencies. Otherwise, dualists, materialists, spirit worshippers, ascetics, and even those who sacrifice their children would all claim that they are seeking God sincerely. Right? Well, that's a pretty harsh form of worship. I need to sacrifice my own son in order to demonstrate my love and affection for God. Isn't that greater than just keeping Shabbat? He says no, because that's not what God asked for. Devotion to God is measured in your following his instructions, no more and no less. Not coming up with some sort of religious fervor and zealousness in order to demonstrate your love for God, because God never required that. But we have already established that one approaches God only through the commandments he himself gave, only what God instructed. And only he knows their full structure, their proper divisions, times, places, and consequences, through which his favor and attachment to the divine presence are attained. God gave us, in some cases, very, very specific rules, very specific measures, so that we don't add to the measure and we don't subtract from it. High devotion in Judaism is not measured by how much you do, but by how precisely you follow the mitzvot. This is exactly what we see in the construction of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, or the Mikdash. Regarding every detail, it says in B'Tzalel made the ark, the cover, the curtains, and each scripture repeats, Ka'asher siva, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Nothing was added and nothing omitted. Even though human reasoning alone could never have arrived at such a system. At the end it says, and Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it exactly as the Lord commanded. So they had done. And Moses blessed them. Only after the Mishkan was completed in this exact way did the divine presence descend upon it. In order to receive the Shefa from God, in order to be attached to God, in order to cultivate this relationship with God, you don't suppose misvot, you don't add humrot, you do exactly what he says. Nothing added, nothing omitted. Bal tosif, don't add. Bal tigra, or lo tigra'u mimenu, don't omit anything, don't add anything either. See, someone has a question. Yeti?
Hi, Sammy. Thank you for that. Wonderful. So, the issue of the Karaites sort of interpreting it in their own way and doing things that Hashem did not exactly say to do. Could we say that that's similar to the two sons of Aaron who burned the incense with?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. 100%. That's exactly what happened there with Aharon.
So his two sons, there were specific instructions given by Hashem about how to burn incense, what incense to burn, when, and they went outside of those parameters. It was because they were being overly zealous and they did have
Right.
good
They were being
intentions.
overly zealous. And how is it described? Do you remember how it was described in the Torah? It says, Vayakrivu esh zara. They brought forward a foreign fire. What does that
which he
mean? Esh
didn't command.
zara. Asher lo siva Hashem, which God did not command.
Right.
Any form of worship that you do, that one would do, that God didn't command, is a foreign worship. That's a transgression. The only way to worship, if you want to do something out of worship of God, the only way to do it is the precise way that God prescribed to do it. Yes, Hannah.
Yes, thank you so much. For the carrots, maybe do you have like an example? Because before you said that they were actually following what was written in the Torah, but apparently they were not. They invented further things, right?
Right. So what they did is they rejected the rabbinic tradition. So when Moshe gave us the Torah, he gave us an interpretation of the Torah. He says, "B'Sukkot teshevu shivat yamim." Right. That's what it says about the mitzvah of Sukkot. You must sit in a sukkah for 7 days. What does that mean? What could a sukkah be made of? What's the sechach made of? How big does a sukkah need to be? Right? Who's exempt from sitting in the sukkah? For instance, women don't need to sleep in the sukkah at night. Someone who is sick is not is exempt from being in the sukkah. Someone who is traveling is exempt. Right? How do we know all this? We have a tradition. It's uh, it's an interpretation of the Torah that was received by Moshe and passed down orally from one generation to another. We're going to get more into the oral tradition in the next class. But the Karaites completely rejected this idea of an oral tradition. Basically, it's how God instructed us orally to perform the mitzvot. And they said, I'm going to use my own speculation and rely on the text and figure out for myself what the pasuk, what the verse means, and follow the mitzvot in that way. And so that led them to a very strict, very stringent and harsh way of observing the Torah. Because the Torah could be very harsh if taken literally. Like v'katzuta kappa, right? You see, you cut off her hand, or an eye for an eye, right? And not monetary compensation. Those are other examples. Yes, I see. There's more questions. Esther, yes.
Yes, but looking at some of the examples from that time, they had more, I think, than four major sects, but they had dozens of mini factions that at that time, until they were keeping everything as far as sharing society and studying together in the halls and having intellectual debates, nothing major happened. But is it the destruction, direct destruction that came upon the temples linked to all this getting out of hand at that time?
The Karaites is a later sect. It's true. Times of the Second Temple, there were many sects. By the way, sectarianism is an isur de oraita, right? Being part of a sect of Judaism, that itself is a very severe transgression of lo titgodedu, lo tiyu agudot. There shouldn't be sects, right? There shouldn't be this Hasidut and this Hasidut and this Hasidut. I would even extend it to say, not to say I am a Zionist and I am secular and I am religious and I am Chardal. I think all this is dividing Judaism into sects. All this is asur. All right? We're Jews. We're all Jews. We all have to see each other as part of the same nation. Some observe more, some observe less. Some are extremely particular with certain aspects of the mitzvot, and as we'll see, others neglect certain aspects of the mitzvot. Right? Just because one person is very particular with Shabbat and Kashrut, right, doesn't make him a better Jew than someone who completely neglects Shabbat and Kashrut, but he endangers his life in Milchemet Mitzvah, fighting for the security of the nation. Right? These follow certain mitzvot and neglect others, and these follow other mitzvot and neglect others. Our aspiration should be that each of us individually follow as many mitzvot as possible as individuals, and as a nation to follow the entirety of the Torah. That's without belonging to any sect. So what happened in the Second Temple, there were many different sects, each competing with each other, which eventually each had a slightly different interpretation of the Torah, which eventually led to the destruction of the Second Temple and us being dispersed in exile, and as a result, becoming even more and more sectarian. But we're all back today, and we should be striving to unite the sects into one Judaism, or completely break down all these sectarian definitions. Yes, anything else?
Sorry, what did you just mention? The destruction of the temple was because of the different sects, like the different interpretations of the Torah, or because
that's what the Hachamim say. The destruction of the Second Temple is because sinat hinam. There were so many different sects, and they were all competing with each other. Basically, every sect hated the other. You see this a lot between different sects in every religion, not just Judaism, right? And it's just a complete breakdown of society, makes the society itself vulnerable to external threats, which ultimately brought to the destruction of the temple. Maybe if we weren't separated then into sects, even though we were under Roman rule, we'd be able to approach the Roman Empire with more wisdom. What happened then is one sect burnt all the grain that was held within Jerusalem to try to force everyone to a face-to-face confrontation with the Romans. Other sects wanted to take a different approach. Each had their Rebbe leading them, and that completely destroyed the second commonwealth of Judaism and led us into a very terrible exile. Does that answer your question?
yes, thank you. Maybe someone could write in the chat how what you said, Sina vesicham, and before you
Sinat hinam. It means free hatred, or we call it it's like unreasonable or unfounded hatred. Unfortunately, you still see this today. One Jewish sect hating another just because, I don't know, they're Chiloni, or just because they're Yemeni, because they're right thinkers, or because they're secular, or whatever.
and the Hebrew expression for you should not be sects. It's you said it.
It's Lo titgodedu.
A lot. Thank you.
By the way, practically speaking, I see. Okay, we're going off on a different tangent than I thought I would. Practically speaking, by the way, you see this in Hilchot Shechita, right? The first halacha in Hilchot Shechita is Hakol Kesherin Lishchot. Everybody is kosher to be a shochet, right? And other rules in Hilchot Shechita, Rov Hayot Kesherot, the majority of the hayot, of the animals, are kosher, even without checking. That means, by the way, it's an accepted stringency upon everybody, but you have to understand it's a stringency to check the lungs after slaughtering. So to the point where the halacha says, right, if you lost the lung before you checked it, the haya is kasher. It's considered kasher. What does that mean, kasher? It means you can eat it. But now there's this whole chiluk between, is it kasher or is it halak, right? The halacha forbids not eating because it's not halak, because that's bal tashchit, right? You're going to throw away a whole cow that you slaughtered. It's very, very expensive. So what is there now? It's even worse. No, it has to be halak beit Yosef. It has to be glat. It has to be eda haredi. This is lo titgodidu. This is absolutely forbidden. If it's not this specific shochet, then I'm not going to eat its meat. That's asur. And it's explicit in Ilchot Shechita. That's asur. That's lo titgodedu. The first halacha, hakol keshirin nishchot. Anybody who knows how to do shechita, right? Even if he's 15 years old, even if it's a woman who's past 12 years old, anybody that's Jewish and chayav in misvot, if he knows 5 halachot of shechita and he does shechita, his shechita is kasher, as long as he complied with those 5 halachot, right? To say I'm not going to eat someone else's shechita is isur d'oraita. That's lo titgodedu. So I don't like this whole, no, I only eat halak, I only eat glat, I only eat Rav Mahfoud, I only eat this, I only eat that, Beit Yosef. No, if it's kasher, it's kasher. And if you don't eat because it's not kosher enough for you, right? Well, that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is describing here. Our instructions are very precise. And if God didn't prescribe something harsh, then it's forbidden to make it harsh. If he prescribed something difficult, then it's also forbidden to be lenient on it. In our vidui, in Yom Kippur, we say, Hasher hekalta echmarnu, right? That which you made easy, we made difficult, and that which you made difficult, we made easy. They're both just as bad. The humrah is as bad as the kula. What's our baseline? What does the halacha actually require of us to do? We do that. We don't make our lives more difficult than the halacha required, and not easier than the halacha requires. And you know that before completing all this, I'm going to go on into what I actually was going to discuss. Is now we're coming to Shavuot. Shavuot is the acceptance of the covenant that God made with us. We see in the previous parasha, Parashat Behar Bechukotai, right, the last parashiot of Sefer Vayikra, right? Behar says these are the mitzvot that God commanded in Har Sinai, and then it goes to full description of the mitzvot of Shemitah in Yovel. And the Chachamim ask, first of all, we're at the end of Sefer Vayikra. Har Sinai was at the beginning of Sefer Shemot. What is it? They say, Ma inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai. Why does the Torah all of a sudden wake up to say, these are the mitzvot that we received in Sinai, and it says this only really about the Shemitah in Yovel? And it says, Lelamedcha, to teach you, that same way Shemitah and Yovel was given in Sinai, so to all the mitzvot, with all of the definitions and descriptions and details were given in Sinai. But then why is it so explicit about Shemitah and Yovel? There's some sort of deeper, intrinsic connection between the laws of Shemitah and Yovel and the law and Har Sinai itself. Har Sinai is where we contracted the covenant with God. Har Sinai is when we became a nation from former slaves to Egypt, right? We became the servants of God, essentially meaning we serve nobody, only God. That is what made us a free nation. And the Shemitah and Yovel is all about a financial system of society where every 7 years debts are wiped out, slaves are freed, and the Yovel, people who lost their land, go back to their land. It's all, and it's described as Geula titenu la'aretz. You shall redeem the land. The Shemitah and Yovel is a system that's meant to keep us free from slavery, from economic slavery. One of the mitzvot that is detailed there is the absolute prohibition against ribit, loans with interest, which is something that as a society we transgress very grossly today, right? Allowing banks to charge interest to individual people is a very terrible transgression. And I'm going to get to how terrible that is soon. Now we go from Perashat Behar to Perashat Bechukotai. And God says, Im Bechukotai telech, right? If you follow these mitzvot, and specifically the ones that they're talking about now, Shemitah and Yovel, then you're going to get all these blessings. And it says, Ve'im bechukotai tim'asu. It says, and if you are disgusted by my mitzvot, and you don't follow the covenant, then I'm going to punish you. And then it says, and if you continue, I'm going to escalate the punishment 7 times. It says, I'm going to escalate, it's going to be 7 times more severe. And if you still don't follow the mitzvot, right, I'm going to escalate it again, 7 times more severe than previously. Can anyone guess how many escalations there are? There's 5 escalations, meaning there's the first level of punishment, 5 escalations, a total of 6 degrees of punishment, each one 7 times more severe than the previous. And why doesn't he escalate it further? He says, because I don't want to wipe you out. Because that is the covenant that I made with you, that I will never wipe you out. What does this remind us of? These 7 levels of escalation, right? This comes right after Behar, right? I'm going to give you prosperity if you keep the Shemitah. Shemitah, 7 years, every 7th year is the Shemitah. Every 7th Shemitah is the Yovel. Geula titenu la'aretz. This is how God defines redemption. And how does he define the opposite of redemption? Almost 7 levels of severity and punishment, each one 7 times more severe than the previous. And he ends all that with saying, Az tirseh ha'aretz et shabbatoteha. And then the land will claim its Shabbat. Meaning everything we suffer for not following the covenant. Again, the 7x7 matrix is because we're not redeeming the land by keeping the terms of the covenant. And how does it define it? It says, Ve'im bechukotai tima'asu. It says, if you shall despise my mitzvot. It's not just saying you're not keeping the mitzvot. What does that mean, despise the mitzvot? It says, well, the mitzvot are inconvenient for us. We're going to keep some mitzvot, but you know what? I don't want to get rid of all my chametz on Pesach. So I'm going to make up some sort of loophole that there's almost no basis for in halakha. I'm going to come up with this thing called mechirat chametz, selling my chametz. Something that the Chachamim never imagined, something the Torah never prescribed. And you know what? I'm going to just sign this paper, not even transfer real funds or anything, and keep the chametz in my house because it's inconvenient. The Torah says not to carry from place to place on Shabbat. It's one of the 39 avot melacha. So I'm going to take this idea that the Chachamim said of an eruv, and I'm going to blow it right out of proportions and apply it to an entire city. We'll have one little string go around the city and call that an eruv, and now I can conveniently now carry it from place to place, right? That's not how an eruv works. I don't want to not plow the land on the Shemitah year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell my land to a goy in order to absolve it from the need of Shemitah. By the way, that's an Isur Deoraita, to sell land in Eretz Yisrael to a goy. That's in Bechokotai Timasu. Right? It's inconvenient to not charge the poor interest on their debts. I want to enslave them. Right? God said, can't charge interest. Why? I freed them from Egypt from being their slaves. It says, Li b'nei Yisrael avadim, avadayim. The people of Israel are my slaves, nobody else's slaves. So therefore I forbid taking interest. All right, Hayter Yiska. Give it to the banks. Now the banks have this paper signed by some rabbis that says they can charge anyone they want interest. That is im bechokotai timasu. If you despise my mitzvot, and instead of looking how to fulfill the mitzvot, you try to find ways to outsmart God, to these clever inventions, to be exempt from the mitzvot that you find to be inconvenient, then you need to ask yourself, is this really sincere, this covenant that I'm making with God? How does he escalate it every time? The Torah says, right? It's not clear what keri means. But let's say it's saying, if you're trying to be clever, right? I too am going to go in keri with you. We'd call it today in contracts, contractual law, we'd call it, in Hebrew we call it, what's the word? Tom lev, right? If you sign a contract, you need to sign it. I don't remember the legal term in English, but tom lev, meaning with good intention, not with ways to find how can I technically maybe keep the contract or not breach the contract without actually keeping the contract. So God says, if you're going to try to be clever with me, I'm going to be 7 times more clever back with you in punishing you. Says, who are we trying to fool? Do we love God? Do we love His Torah and really aspire to keep the Torah in its totality as He prescribed to us in Sinai, as we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, without trying to find clever loopholes to absolve ourselves from keeping the Torah because maybe certain mitzvot are inconvenient? If we want Ge'ulah titinu la'aretz, it means we're going to follow the Torah as prescribed by God, as passed down in our tradition, how to interpret it, without adding any stringencies, without adding any leniencies that aren't defined by the rabbinic tradition. Later inventions to absolve us from the obligations of the Torah is in bechukotai tim'asu, is despising God's mitzvot. And when we say in Yom Kippur, we say ubahalti in part of our vidui, right? At the opening of Yom Kippur, one of the things we do vidui for is ubahalti betoratach, and I was disgusted by your Torah, ubaharti betorati, and I chose my own Torah, my own way of worshiping you, which is a very, very severe transgressions. I have a hard time actually saying it on Yom Kippur. So as we enter Shavuot, this renewal of the covenant or reenactment of the covenant in Sinai, we need to be sincere with ourselves. Do we love the mitzvot? Do we intend to keep the mitzvot as God prescribed them or not? Are we trying to find clever ways out of it? And that's my message for today. If we really want redemption, we really want this connection with God, we really want this divine providence, we really want God to dwell among us in the Mishkan, right? Rebuild the Mikdash, we need to be sincere about the covenant. All right. Any questions? Okay, no questions.
Thank you.
Does that mean everyone's sincere?
Thank you so much. Actually, I would. We don't have time, I think.
Sorry, yes?
I would have a question, but I think we don't